today we are going to be chatting about what I feel to be one of the unsung heroes of both the art room and the classroom, and that is modeling clay. So a little bit of a story time. When I began teaching in 1998, that's right, I began in the 1900s, my classroom had two art supplies: a coffee can full of broken and busted crayons and a bin modeling clay. Well, I kind of knew what to do with the crayons. I had no idea what I was supposed to do with that modeling clay until I read in my art teacher and curriculum that I was to be teaching clay. Not having a kiln, this was my only resource to use. And it was then that I learned that modeling clay can be really vital to the elementary art room. And of course, kids absolutely love it. So today I'm going to be sharing with you my 5 favorite ways to use modeling clay in the art room and the classroom, and how to use that modeling clay so that your students enjoy using it and have success. So let's dive in. When using modeling clay for the first time with students, what I always do is make sure that I have one color for everybody. Because when I'm introducing modeling clay, the importance that I want to place on it is how to use it. And I don't want the kids to get all hung up on who has my favorite color and when can we swap colors. So usually I start with one color for everyone. When it comes to the amount of size, I usually give them a size that fits really well into the palm of their hand. Now, modeling clay does take a little bit of what I call warming up to make it easier to use. So when I introduce it to students, I tell them that it's different than the clay that we use that has to be fired in the kiln. That kind of clay is water-based, and if you hold it in your hot little hands for too long, the heat of your hands will dry the clay out. But not so with modeling clay. The longer that you hold it between your hot little hands, the softer and easier to manipulate it gets. So when I'm introducing this kind of clay to my students, I tell them that their hands are like a little microwave. They need to put their clay in their microwave. We all do that sitting on the floor together. We turn our microwaves on. And as we're all sitting there humming, after a couple of seconds, I say ding, which means to open up the microwave. And then we start to work the clay. We're calling this exercising the clay. This is also great because for their little bitty hands, it's awesome for them to build up those hand muscles. But I tell them what we're doing is we are exercising that clay, stretching it and getting it ready to work. And after we stretch it and squish it for a couple of minutes, we pop it back in the microwave. And we do this going back and forth a couple of times until the clay is nice and soft and ready to be used. Once the clay is warmed up, I like to introduce my students to the 3 things that you need to know how to make with clay. And if you can make these 3 things out of clay, then you can literally create anything out of clay. First thing we're going to make is we're going to make a sphere. So to show them, I show them that a sphere is a round piece of clay shaped like a circle. So with their hands, they're going to be making a circle motion as they're pushing their hands together and making a circle. Now we have a sphere. Next up, I tell them that if you can make a sphere, then the next thing I want you to try to make is something called a coil, otherwise known as a clay snake. So to do that, we are not rolling in a circle this time. Instead, we're going up and down with our hands. Now, if I'm working with students and we're doing this together, working on the floor, we're using our hands. But then I also like to demonstrate that if they want their coil to be a little bit longer, then they might want to use the surface of their table to roll back and forth. The last thing that you know how to make, remember there's 3, is something called a slab. A slab is a squished piece of clay. To create that, I tell my students that they need to make a quacking duck. So their quacking duck is just going to quack, 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 and chew on their clay. And this squished, flat piece of clay, this is a slab. And with those 3 things, they can make anything. And it's at this point, I like to grab some ceramic or some clay pieces and see if we can identify the spheres, the slabs, and the coils so that students can begin to understand how they can use those 3 things to create whatever ideas they have. For example, I have this little ceramic bell that features coils, spheres, and slabs. And so I asked them, can you find a sphere looking at this sculpture? When they notice that the head is made out of a sphere, I remind them, you know how to make a sphere. We just created one. And now you know that if you wanted to make something round, something maybe that has a head or with an eye or even the middle of a flower, you could use a sphere. Next up, I asked them to look for the coils. I like to turn it around so they can see the parts of the coil were used for the arms. Lastly, we look for slab. The slab is the squished piece of clay, which is perfect for this blanket that the lady is holding. So just looking for more spheres like the eggs or even the coils of the feather. So that's how I like to go about introducing my students to modeling clay, making sure they warm it up and understand the 3 things that they can use to make anything with their clay. When it comes to cleanup, no matter what the creation, since it is modeling clay, it's not something that we can keep. This is our practicing clay and our hand exercising clay. So we always have to put it back into a sphere. And I like to keep my clay organized by color in a Ziploc bag. And to clean our hands, we usually visit the sink or use a wet wipe. Now, once modeling clay has been introduced to my students, I wanted to share with you the 5 ways that I love to use it in my art room. First way I like to use modeling clay in my art room is with my early finishers. We all have them, those kids who are just finished, and it's great to have different kinds of centers or things for them to go and do. Once I've introduced modeling clay to my students, I have it available to them in a bag so that they can go and get a Ziploc bag, get out a little paper mat to put underneath the clay and create. And I'll share with you some resources that my students use when they're using early finisher modeling clay. Another way that I like to use modeling clay is if my students are getting ready to embark on a clay unit. Even if they're using something like kiln fire clay, practicing with modeling clay is always a great idea. I did create some free resources for y'all to use in your art making world, and that leads us to our next couple of ways to use modeling clay in the art room or the classroom. You can use it as a review for lines. By placing this in a sleeve protector, your students can create lines with the clay and just kind of drape them or draw them directly onto here. We'll get a close-up and I'll show you what I mean. Moving on from lines, we move on to shapes. And I broke these shapes up so your students could really see how they're using lines to create those shapes. We've got the basic shapes here and then even more shapes there. Those 3 forms that I mentioned, here is just a reminder of what those are. And in this picture, they can practice using those 3 forms to create. Let's kick things off with this clay forms to know sheet. Like I said, I like to keep these in sheet protectors so that students can build directly onto the sheet and then just take all of the clay off when they're finished and roll it back into a sphere. So the key behind this one is to really reinforce the notion that if they know how to make a sphere, a coil, and a slab, they can create anything. So I just drew a simple picture, hopefully indicating which one they were to create to assemble this picture. Of course, you could allow your students to experiment with the other colors of modeling clay. Prang makes a ton of different colors for students to choose from. Me, right here, like I said, just to reinforce the ideas that we're going with just these 3 forms to create, I'm just using 1 color. The only problem when you're introducing more colors when you're using modeling clay is the tendency to blend colors together. That would be great if you're doing a color mixing unit, but once you do that with modeling clay, you can't separate out those colors. So it's important for students to realize, unless that's something you're going for, that they need to keep those colors separate. I do like to have students use simple tools that they would also use with ceramic clay so they get kind of used to it. For example, a popsicle stick or even a wooden skewer for cutting. Another clay tool that I've recently learned about that I really enjoy using are ones that have a little metal end, almost like a roller ball kind of surface, but that ball does not roll at the end. You'll see it here in just a moment, and it's really great for cutting into the clay. But just something simple like popsicle sticks and skewers also work great.
To further expand on this idea, you could even get out a coloring book and slide a sheet from a coloring book page into one of these sheet protectors and allow students to build a picture from there, or even better, have them draw a simple animal or landscape, self-portrait design, whatever. Slide that into the sheet protector and allow them to use a slab, a sphere, or a coil to recreate their design. And when it's time to clean up, just have them grab their ball of clay and just tap the other pieces of clay to collect them all, roll it into a sphere, and put it back where you're keeping your modeling clay. When it comes to working with the modeling clay and kids, you can use modeling clay to reinforce any unit that you've just covered with your students. For example, if you've just done a unit on line or even shape, letters, numbers, you name it, have your students recreate those lines, those numbers, those shapes with the modeling clay. And one of the ways that I do that with lines is that I have them do the line sheet first, and then from there, they move on to shapes. When I drew the shape sheet, that's kind of tricky to say, I wanted to make it so that the students could see the separate line segments so they would know how many sides or lines it takes to create a shape. And all of these sheets are available for you to use in your art making world with your young artist. And be sure and check out this modeling clay. It does come in more colors other than red, even though that's what I'm using. There's every color in the rainbow available with Prang's modeling clay.
And there you have it. Those are my very favorite things to do with modeling clay, how I like to introduce it to my students, and how I use it in my art room. Toodles!